Alrighty, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us on today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa with ITS Communications, and today we have Tyler Larkworthy and Joseph Cabariti from our research informatics team. They're going to be talking about RStudio and RShiny. So RStudio is an editor tool that helps you write the R language, and RShiny is a tool that helps you visualize that code into an app that's accessible on the internet. So Tyler and Joseph are going to go through what the tool does, how you can use it at Weill Cornell, and what's coming in the future for these services. Before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know that I am recording today's session. So if you want to go back and refer to anything that you may have missed because you came a little late, or you just want to share it with your colleagues, perhaps, you'll get a follow-up email later today with a link to the recording, as well as any other links that may come up that we talk about during today's session. I also do have everyone on mute just to avoid some background noise while the presentation's going on. But if at any point you have any questions, please feel free to just put them in the chat and we'll be monitoring them and answering your questions as we go through. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tyler. Thanks so much for joining us today, Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Tyler Larkworthy. I'm a data and software engineer with the research informatics team here at Weill Cornell. Today we're going to be going over RStudio as well as some of the enterprise RStudio technologies that our team is working on setting up. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, I'll be giving a brief intro to RStudio, as well as pointing out some of the differences between the desktop version of RStudio as an IDE versus the hosted version of that software. And I'll be giving you an intro into the enterprise products that we've been working on setting up. Then I'll also give you an overview of the actual details of that setup, the workflows we are trying to have in place, and a short demo as well. So let's get started by talking about R and RStudio. So in case you aren't familiar, R is a programming language. It's what we call a high-level programming language. It's mostly procedural, so most of the statements are essentially making function calls. And it's widely used in data analysis and visualization. It's very handy for running analysis on data. It's very handy for making things like graphs as well as dashboards. And RStudio is what we call an integrated development environment for R. So it's similar to something like if you've used Visual Studio before, Sublime Text even. It just gives you a nice environment to edit your R code, run it, see the results. RShiny is a framework for R that allows developers to create web apps. So as you can see in this example here, this is just a little toy data example with, I think, bird bill length data. This is a nice scatter plot here. And this is just a screenshot, but if this were the actual app, you could actually click these checkboxes to change the data you're visualizing. So you can imagine how useful this is in terms of being able to create an interactive visualization of your data and allow people to change what's being displayed. So now I want to talk a little bit about the differences between desktop versus hosted RStudio. I would guess that many of you are probably familiar with RStudio desktop, but not the idea of hosting RStudio projects or Shiny apps. So like I mentioned earlier, the desktop app gives you the ability to edit, run R code. You can also use the desktop app to create Shiny apps, but the thing is, when you run those Shiny apps, they're only hosted on your local machine. That means that other users who are on the internet or on the general WCM VPN, they still won't be able to access that app because it's just being run on your local machine. So this is what creates the use case for dedicated servers. So dedicated servers that can host our Shiny apps basically allow you to deploy those apps onto the internet. And then that allows you to let other users view or even potentially change the code for your app. And there are two different types of these dedicated servers. One of them are community editions. That's sort of that's the free edition. It has a more restricted feature set in comparison to enterprise servers, which are designed to be used, as you might imagine, by big enterprises. So they contain a more expansive feature set, but they often have to be licensed. And so just to talk a little bit more about those enterprise products, there is a company called Posit, which is actually the company that originally developed RStudio. They offer different products that allow you to deploy our apps on an enterprise scale. The three most notable ones are Connect, Workbench, and Package Manager, although today we're mainly going to be focusing on Connect and Package Manager. And Connect is essentially what I mentioned in the previous slide. It is an enterprise server for hosting Shiny apps and for allowing other users to view those apps, change those apps. So our goal in using these enterprise products is to provide enhanced collaboration, like I said, allowing users to view and change those apps, security, because Connect has many features that are good for us for using sensitive data, being able to restrict who can see that app that displays sensitive data, and scalability. Scalability is also a big thing. These enterprise apps allow us to make an app accessible to many more people than we would be able to otherwise. So this is a long-term project that is still in progress. That part of our team is taking on is to set up and maintain instances that host this kind of software and make it available for use by the broader WCM community. And so here, like I was talking about, these are features that are specific to the enterprise edition. And as you can imagine, some of these are quite useful for us. So SSO authentication, Git deployment, being able to use professional drivers, as well as support for Python code. So just to give you a little bit more information about Posit Connect, like I mentioned a few slides ago, what this does, it gives us a centralized platform for our users to be able to deploy their Shiny apps, and it will nicely host those apps, allowing other users to access them. And another important thing is that people who publish apps will have the ability to manage who has access to actually view those apps or who has access to actually modify them. And now Package Manager. Oh, we have a question in the chat. I see, does Enterprise Edition allow the Posit Connect through API or ODBC for a SQL Server? Yes, it does. So one thing that that will come up a little bit later in these slides, but one thing that's important to note is that yes, within our code for your Shiny apps, you can establish a connection to a database and retrieve data from that database. And that's all fully supported by Connect too. So a project that's uploaded to Connect, as long as it's configured correctly, that project, while it's running on the Connect server, can still make those same connections to a database for reading data. Hopefully it answers your question. Oh, API or ODBC? I believe you can do either. I'm 99% sure that ODBC is supported for sure. But I believe that it allows you to there are different ways that it will allow you to connect.
We have successfully done both.
Thank you, Joey. Yes. All right, but let's get back to Posit Package Manager. So this is a very handy piece of software because most R projects have dependencies, right? They import packages that provide predefined functionality. So package manager essentially allows us to manage those a repository of those packages on our own. So typically, our developers will use centralized package repositories. That's still supported, but with package manager, we can host our own local copies of packages from popular package management repositories. And we can also develop our own private packages and have those be used within the WCM community.
One thing I want to add there is that we can also maintain different versions of different packages. So especially with regards to if there's a specific version that doesn't work with the latest version of R 4.1 point whatever, or 4.2 point whatever, if you want to go to an earlier version, we can also maintain that through package manager. So
Right.
Extended functionality here.
All right. I would like to pause for just a second. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Use the raise your hand functionality or unmute yourself if you want. All right, I'll give another few seconds, but I'm not seeing anything right now. Okay, let's keep moving forward. So now we're going to get into a bit more of the details of the setup of this software and the workflows we are trying to put in place. So for our current setup of Connect Package Manager, we have 3 AWS hosted machines hosting test and production instances of Connect and Package Manager. We have DNS entries that provide friendly URLs. These will likely be announced when we actually go live with these services. Users can publish projects to Connect 3 different ways. So you can publish projects from the desktop version of RStudio, so directly from that IDE. You can connect to the Connect instance and publish the project. You can publish from a Git repository there's an automated integration that allows for updates to be pulled from a Git repository. Or you can publish from what's called Workbench, which, like I said, we're not going to be getting into the details of it today, but you can think of that just like an online version of the IDE of RStudio. Users can, like I mentioned a few slides ago in response to that question, so users can get the data for the project either by bundling a file and referring to that file directly, or they can code a connection to a database. And like I mentioned, I think there are various protocols and many different database types are supported. And then, like we mentioned with Package Manager, by integrating Connect with Package Manager, this allows for people who are deploying to Connect to have their dependencies handled in a very straightforward manner. Moving on, one additional topic to discuss is the idea of running Shiny apps in Docker containers. Without getting into the details of containerization, because that's a bit out of the scope of this talk, you can essentially think of this as a very neatly bundled R application along with its dependencies that runs in a very isolated environment. For our purposes, this is pretty useful for less highly sensitive data in terms of apps that don't need to have their viewing restricted. So the server we've set up here allows us to deploy a Docker container to that server that runs an R app, and then users can access that app over the web. And it is running in a nice isolated environment. And another thing about the Docker server 2 to note is that this also allows us to make apps that are available not just to WCM users, but in fact, available to the public internet. So I have a technical diagram here. The details of this are not super important. I just wanted to indicate broadly that we have something called application load balancers that sit in front of the actual servers that the software is running on. And all of this is within AWS. The only significant thing to note here is this distinction between our sort of back-end servers and then these front-end, what are called application load balancers, which users will actually connect to. Oh, I see another question in the chat. How do you handle security credentials for ODBC connections? Is the server the user or is the developer the user? Will the server need security access to the data source? So in terms of credentials, Joey, do you think you could speak to that?
Sure. So there are a variety of options that we have. One of the biggest ways we've configured this is using service accounts to handle accessibility, and we save the service account's password in the as a variable that's passed through to the application. The other way, the more streamlined, efficient way, is that it uses the actual credentials of the user accessing the application, and it passes it through. Both ways are doable, and both ways are ways that we've tested out. So, you know, there's a lot of different options. Excuse me, a lot of different options here, but the important thing to remember is the considerations with regards to actual data security have to come from the collaboration between us and the user. And the reason for that is because it's not just we're not just exposing that data, you're exposing that data to the application. There are IRB considerations there are a bunch of different considerations. You know, there's a lot of considerations for which way we should be doing it. Yeah, for our purposes, we can handle both for now. And we're working on other ways as well.
Right. Yeah, I think the bottom line is we have a lot of flexibility in how we can do things. It's going to also come down to a case-by-case basis of how exactly sensitive the data is and where it's located. And we will work with developers when they're ready for deployment to smooth out those issues. I see another question. What is the process of connecting an employee's RStudio to WCM Connect / Package Manager? Is it through the research informatics team, like a tracks request, or some other team at WCM?
Can I take this one?
Of course, yes.
Can you clarify for us? Are you talking about connecting your RStudio instance to connect, or are you trying to connect your own package to Package Manager?
I've actually, David, you might be able to unmute. I've given you the option to, if you want to elaborate a little more on your question.
Sorry, I'm actually eating lunch. Hold on.
Sorry about that.
Whatchamacallit? Like, what if I want to publish a RShiny let's say dashboard of like I guess like based on like SQL data, like
Yep.
EHR data.
Yep.
So I could show it to like my supervisor or like my department.
So we are working on a process for that. Just another thing to consider is that this process is not yet fully live yet. So we're working on the process for this, but we're defining the process for that. There's a research computing request form and a whole bunch of other factors that go into this, including a workflow. We're going to get into the workflow generally, but this is not a published yet workflow. So we're still working on the logistics of this, but that's a fantastic question. And it, technically speaking, it will be through the RI team if it's access to sensitive research data and needs the RShiny server. Hope that answers your question, David. Back to you, Tyler.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Joey. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. Keep them coming. But anyway, back to where we were. So that was the technical diagram for Connect and Package Manager. Here's the one for our Docker server. Again, only thing to really point out here is that we have externally accessible sort of front end here, meaning that it will be accessible even to people outside of the WCM VPN on the general internet. And again, an inaccessible or private server for the actual hosting. All right, yes, now as Joey was mentioning, we will get into an overview of the workflow. So this is what we refer to as the manual workflow. This is essentially not using an automated Git integration. And in this case, the user would develop an app, hand off the code for initial publishing. We will meet with the user, we'll perform a code review, an app review, and check for any security or IRB issues, make sure those are resolved before moving forward. Then as the user continues to develop, we will keep publishing changes after those changes are reviewed. We will go through a final checklist, a final code review, and a final app review, and then the app will finally go live on the prod server. So that's the manual workflow. A bit more, I guess, easier workflow in terms of automation is using Git. So for this workflow, we will actually handle setting up the Git repo, and it will have two important branches, develop and master. Master branch will be essentially read-only for the end user. It will only be writable by us in research informatics, but the develop branch will be fully accessible for the end user. So the end user will essentially be pushing their changes to the develop branch, and we'll be the only ones with permission to actually pull changes from develop into master. So after we've set that repo up and configured the develop branch, we'll configure the develop branch to be connected to the RShiny Connect test instance. Sorry, that wording is very confusing. So let me rephrase. The RShiny Connect test instance, we can configure that to be pulling code from the develop branch. So that's on the test server. And then on the prod server, we'll be pulling from the master branch. After we give the Git repo access to the user will develop their app, of course, and commit it to Git on the develop branch. Again, just like in the manual workflow, we'll meet with the user, we'll do a code review and app review, checking for issues. Then we merge develop to master, which signifies that we've signed off on the code. The user can continue to develop, and we'll keep pushing to that develop branch. And then when the app is finalized, we will do a final checklist, do a final code review and app review, and we will once again merge from develop to master. So it's pretty similar to the manual workflow, but one important thing to note here is that in this case, the actual deployment of the code is automated by Connect itself. When you integrate, let's say, a Git repo into a Connect project, it will do an automatic, every 15 minutes, Connect will pull that Git repo for changes. If it sees changes, it will pull those changes in. So this is kind of handy because it just allows us to work purely with Git and not have to worry about the actual deployment of the code. This diagram, again, might seem kind of overwhelming, but the details are not that important. What I really want to point out here is that at the top, you can see the sort of 3 different sources, possible sources for our project, namely user's machine, from the Workbench app, or from an either internal to WCM Git repository or a Git repository that's public to the general internet. And then another thing I wanted to point out here would be on the left, the data sources that a project can pull from. As you can see, I just want to indicate that we have both, you have both the ability to connect to a file share database within WCM or on the public internet. Oh, I see a question here from Henry. Yes, these slides will be made available. All right, back to the diagram though. Just one more thing to note at the bottom in terms of end users and viewers of your application. So there are 3 different ways to provide a URL for viewers to be able to access your app. Connect can provide a custom URL or an auto-generated URL for the app. You can also within Connect set in a named path for the URL, so it'll be something easily rememberable by users. And finally, there's also the ability to deploy the app more publicly and have a URL that would be accessible even on the public internet. All right, now I will do a brief demo. So as you can see, this is a histogram. Again, this is just toy data, but if I pull the slider, I can increase or decrease the number of bins. And this is just a very simple example of an app that you could create for users. And just to give you a quick look, this is within the Connect app. As you can see, we have a nice settings pane here. There's a setup of who can view and change the application. I could change the content URL if I wanted to. A lot of handy features. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Just to give some concluding notes though that are important. Like Joey mentioned earlier, these services are not yet live. And access will be limited in the future due to licensing constraints on maximum number of users. So we may have to do a sort of temporary access thing where users have access as long as they need it and then have that access removed. But of course, all of this will be is to be determined. And the rollout will be phased. So you shouldn't expect all of these services to go live at once. But do stay tuned for future announcements about this, as we do not have a set date yet. All right, I see a question from David in the chat. Does RShiny support Plotly? Yes, it does, actually. I have recently deployed an app that used that library, so I can confirm that it definitely does. Will there be a charge to the user's department? Joey, you want to answer that?
It does depend on the project, on the use case, and on a bunch of different factors. There may be charges related to that. I don't know, and it also depends on how many users you're planning on pulling in. If you're pulling in like 1 or 2 users, there may not be a charge. But I'm not we're not promising anything as yet. The goal is to have an enterprise process that the majority of the institution can use. So we're trying to make it as meaningful as possible. So if we can get away without charging, that would be most beneficial. But in an ideal world, nothing would be charged. But we're working on it. We're working to see what we can swing.
I did get a question from somebody in my chat that made me just wonder. So the person that messaged me said that they're new to using R. Are there any resources that the research informatics team would recommend to somebody who is getting into R and wants to learn more about it?
There are a number of tutorials online. Definitely we can think of some useful some useful tutorials. LinkedIn Learning has plenty of those as well. So we can take a look and see which one fits best, which ones we recommend. Right now we don't have a list of recommended courses just yet. But yeah, David mentioned LinkedIn Learning and Percipio are both free to Weill Cornell employees. Just as an aside, use your resources. You have a resource available to you, use it. It's one of the biggest resources we have, which is really fantastic.
I'll provide in the follow-up email to everyone links to LinkedIn Learning and Percipio, so that if you haven't had a chance to use them yet, you can sign in with your Seaweed and password and have full access to those tools.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Oh, one other question. Any reports or any practical scenarios of using Power BI with R?
So Power BI doesn't mesh super well with R. Python does. Power BI does not, and I suspect it's got something to do with the fact that Power BI is a Microsoft tool. But for right now, it doesn't really work super well. So it is a choice of Power BI versus RShiny for these days. I see David put in a question about size of the data. So realistically speaking, it's a good question. Realistically speaking, one thing to remember is that this is not a high performance computing server. So if you're running analytics, ideally the data that you're running analytics on is already mostly pre-processed. If you're planning on processing on the fly and generating, I don't know, functional data analysis that takes, hundreds of gigabytes worth of data, I don't know that the server can handle it, especially if it's pulling it into memory. What we generally recommend is that you pull in the data, do the data and analysis elsewhere, and then get the final results somewhere that you can actually present. So besides for the fact that analytics on the fly is vastly exhausting, you also want your app to be able to run quickly, and analytics on the fly never runs quickly. So your safest bet is to actually analyze as much of the data as you can and front load it before you put it into your application. Does that make sense? Awesome. No problem, David. Back to you, Tyler. Any other questions for Tyler?
Yeah, any other questions, guys? Keep them coming.
While we're waiting to see if any more questions come in, I just wanted to remind those who may have signed in late that we are recording today's session, so you will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording, as well as some of the other things we discussed today, just summarized in the email with like the slides and other things like that. Oh, when can we see the future announcements or the phases that you're planning to release?
Yeah, like I said, there's no go live date just yet. I don't think there's really a set timeline.
So one consideration that we have, and this is one of the biggest considerations, is how do we present this as a model to other people? Just remember that it's not about, the technology is easy to set up. It's how do we manage the user requirements and all of the stuff. So really and truly, we're doing our best to provide as much guidance ahead of time. That way, when we actually go live, it doesn't, break down in a second. We want to be able to make this as robust a process as possible, such that end users like you will be able to just use it and not have to worry and stress out about it. So if you have feedback about that, feel free to reach out to us and let us know, hey, this is something I'm interested in. Hey, hey, this is feedback I'd like to be able to see in a use case of using RShiny. So yeah, any feedback that you guys can provide is absolutely beneficial to our workflows.
If there aren't any other questions, we could wrap it up a few minutes early. And if more questions come up after the session, feel free to just reply back to the follow-up email we send out. I can make sure that Tyler and Joseph and Bo, who's also on, who signed in a little later, see your questions and can hopefully point you in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Definitely reach out and we will try to get back to you if you have more questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tyler and Joseph and Bo. I know that you were quiet in the back, but you're here to support. Thank you guys. This is everyone from the co-hosts are from the research informatics team. Thank you for learning more about RStudio and RShiny and stuff that's coming in the future, and have a great rest of your week. We're going to be off next week for Thanksgiving, but we'll be back with more Tech Tuesdays after the holiday. So everyone have a really great holiday and we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.